Hello and welcome. My name is Al Barrows, and this is UFO Disclosure, the podcast that's meant to show an average person's reaction to all the UFO, UAP news from everywhere and anywhere. Today, I'd like to relate something that I saw on Top 5S. It involves an American woman who claimed to have had very unique encounters with ETs. Here is one of the most thoroughly documented cases in modern ufology. It all began on the evening of January the 25th, 1967, at the family home in Massachusetts. 30-year-old Betty Andreasson was working around the house trying to ensure that her 7 children were safe and well after her then-husband, James, had been involved in an accident and was currently in the hospital. Thankfully, Betty's parents were actively helping with the day-to-day chores and were present at the time of the encounter. At 6:35 p.m., as the evening began to roll in and the sky turned dark, strange things began to occur inside the home. Lights began to flicker on and off before slowly dimming down and turning off completely. The television suddenly turned off on its own, and the refrigerator stopped humming. Initially, as many would suspect, Betty assumed that the issue was down to a power outage. However, after ushering everyone into the kitchen, she and her family noticed a pulsating reddish-pink light beaming through the pantry window. Its color was radiant among the darkness. It grew brighter as the family watched in confusion and amazement. Checking to see what all the fuss was about, the father peeked out of the back window. 5 small figures were making their way towards the house from the adjacent orchard. They were hopping as opposed to walking or running, which immediately startled the family. Not only this, but the beings created some kind of formational dance, one behind the other, in a contorting, springing motion that could not be performed by regular human legs. That synchronized approach revealed their oversized heads. They were also clothed in strange costumes. Sensing that the power outage and eerie performances outside was a prank, the father locked eyes with one of the beings in an attempt to ward them off. However, when the creature looked directly at him, he felt an immediate dizziness and disorientation all over his body. The queasiness made its way through the kitchen, where Betty and her family also felt a strong sense of tiredness and hypnotic weakness coursed through their bodies. Trying to shake the feeling, Betty looked towards the living room, where her children had run, but were frozen in time, their bodies caught in the act of playing. Likewise, the father and mother had succumbed to the stillness and were frozen in position. As the air grew heavy and the lights emitted stronger within the house, Betty realized that she too was paralyzed, her body helpless, and her voice unable to emit a single scream. Now frozen in terror, Betty could only watch as the beings entered the house without even knocking or physically opening the door. They merely walked through it, as if it were invisible. Getting a closer look, Betty could see that they were shorter than initially thought, 3 to 4 feet, except one which towered over the others. Their pear-shaped heads showed enormous black eyes that reflected no light, and their mouths were the tiniest slits. The one-piece suits were blue and wrapped with white belts and had a bird-like emblem on their sleeves. Their hands had 3 long tapered fingers, but she couldn't see their feet that hovered above the floor. At this point, the tallest being made its way towards Betty. Talking to her telepathically, the ET called itself Kuzaga and explained that she and her family were in no immediate danger and that the beings did not pose a threat. At this point, Betty claimed that Kuzaga, the leader of these ETs, required her to enter their spacecraft. Now, having lost all control of her limbs, voice, and sense of reality, the aliens led Betty from the house towards a disc-shaped object measuring 20 feet across, which sat on a snowy slope near the orchard. The craft glowed with that same reddish-pink light seen from the kitchen. its smooth metallic surface could not be associated with any other vehicle, airborne or otherwise, that she had seen in the past. A small hole opened up at the side of the vessel, as if from nowhere. No door or latch had been seen. It merely formed to allow entry. Betty later described their craft as responding to intention rather than mechanics. And upon entering, Betty noticed an antiseptic smell of heated metal combined with something acidic that filled the craft. Similar to outside, the inside of the craft was lit up with pulsating lights that seemed to emit from nowhere. Trying to find an exit route or an opening on the flesh-like walls, she realized that any attempt to escape the structure would be in vain, as the opening that she came through had now closed up. The walls were rounded, a curved smoothness that fused together without any edges or corners. She said it was like being inside of a shell. She also described a sense of weightlessness that even though her feet touched the floor, the sensation felt like a gentle trampoline, soft and springy, that was overtaken by a slow floating phenomenon. And then the experiments began. Upon being placed on a chair-like surface, the ETs subjected Betty Andreasson to a number of intrusive, painful, and mind-boggling tests, one of which involved a large needle being inserted into her skin to inject extra fluids. Another shocking procedure involved the removal of what she described as a small object from her head through a needle which was inserted into her nostril. So before going on, I thought it was important to note here that Betty Andreasson was a very religious woman. Betty's experience aboard the spacecraft eventually led her to say that she met a being whom she believed to be God. The ETs called her the Chosen One, or in her words, a messenger from God. Betty would go on to describe what she saw when these ETs took her on a tour of an alternative universe. Cities, which consisted of crystalline towers, rose up and into the skies above, illuminating various colors and geometric patterns. She also recalled the inhabitants of these places as being made up of pure light, tall beings that morphed between solid and radiant flesh. And the most interesting and well-described entity that she witnessed was that of an extremely large bird that amassed her whole field of vision. Its body supposedly glowed with a fire whose flames did not burn. The ET, which called itself Quasga, informed Andreasson that she would wake up and have no recollection of what occurred on board the spaceship, at least for a while, and that he and his companions loved humanity and wanted to help us eradicate our bad habits and self-destructive behaviors. Betty woke up to find her entire family still frozen. All of a sudden, she was able to move around and speak, as if the ETs flipped a switch to return her to normal. Likewise, the children woke from their slumber and began playing again, and her parents proceeded to walk about the house as if nothing had happened. There was no sense of loss of time. The clock had frozen. Now, trying not to scare her family, Betty decided to send everyone to bed and tried her best to fall asleep herself. But this proved useless, as her memory was blurred, her body felt different, and her dreams were extremely lucid. Shapes, lights, and colors flashed across her subconscious mind and entered her dream state, which would eventually jolt her awake, where she remained in a sense of paranoia and panic. As the morning passed, she made herself coffee, but recalls falling into a trance after she looked across towards the orchard where the craft had landed. For what felt like hours, everything seemed out of touch. Something was different, something she couldn't explain or remember. Her parents also acted strangely, remaining almost silent throughout the night and into the morning. Their memory of the night before was completely erased, and they too knew something wasn't right. Betty noticed They did not look out the window at any point since her abduction and potted around the house, doing meaningless tasks over and over again as if to keep themselves busy in order to not discuss the strange occurrences that had just befallen them. One of the more interesting pieces of evidence in this case is a blue-colored book that the ETs had given to Betty. According to Betty, she examined the contents of the book several days later. Inside it were weird hieroglyphics, drawings, and scriptures that she could not fully understand. She had no recollection, though, as to how the book disappeared after she finished digesting its pages, nor can she remember where she would have placed such a valuable piece of evidence at the time. Betty was so bothered and confused about what had happened to her that she decided to reach out to ufologist Raymond Fowler. Betty explained to Fowler that she would every so often remember something from the encounter, a flashback of the lights, the craft, the entities, and the book. Physically, she would feel on occasion the heavy pulsating beating in her chest again, the same heaviness that she felt during the abduction and subsequent hours after she was released. The paranoia, the frightening waking in the middle of the night became a regular occurrence for Betty and would haunt her dreams as well as her day-to-day life for many years. She would eventually separate from her husband, remarry, and continue to raise her children to the best of her ability, as well as serving her community and church, clinging to her faith more than ever. The word spread around Betty's community that she had changed. She had effectively gone into her shell and spent countless hours painting and drawing images that even she could not explain. They included the crystalline cities and pulsating crafts with the glowing lights. She was expressing memories she didn't consciously possess. Her memories were seeping out as unexplainable art. Then in 1975, Betty's teenage daughter confessed to her friend that she too had been having dreams of ET contact. The same dreams that her mother was experiencing. The all-encompassing lucidity of the visions was having a huge impact on her as well. The friend mentioned her discussion to a group of paranormal enthusiasts who began to promote the story, which eventually made its way to the New England chapter of the Mutual UFO Network, or MUFON. At the time, author and ufologist Raymond Fowler was a field investigator for MUFON. In the years that followed, the hypnosis sessions allowed Betty to piece together the events in full and became the subject of a book titled A Lifting of the Veil, which recounts the ongoing events and supernatural occurrences since the abduction. In the book, she unpacks her story. Betty discusses a series of encounters with the ETs that stem back to her childhood. Following her marriage in 1978 to Bob Luca, she settled in Connecticut, where her home became the backdrop and location for a number of psychic sessions. Her new husband underwent hypnosis as well. He spoke of a similar set of encounters that resembled Betty's, which continued into the 1990s. So did Betty Andreasson lie to gain fame or perhaps profit from her story? Or was she experiencing a mental breakdown? What I think is that she was fully convinced that all this happened. Betty Andreasson died on March the 18th, 2022. She was 85. My name is Al Barrows. This has been UFO Disclosure. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.